You're tuned in to RX Radio.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Another episode of RX Radio. Radio? Does that sound right? That doesn't sound right. Radio. Like the guy that pushes the shopping cart and runs it in for the touchdown. That is I, your host, Jordan Challo. Coming at you with a special episode. With me today is friend, colleague, training partner, whatever. I'm in Texas. Luke Miller. Luke Miller is the owner-operator of No Switch Fitness. Definitely one of the most cerebral coaches when it comes to the bodybuilding physique development space. Luke and I had met many years ago. Sort of followed each other on social media, and been able to watch him develop No Switch into one of the preeminent bodybuilding physique development coaching services in the industry, an industry that I think sorely needs it. And you'll see the level of attention and detail that Luke puts into this. He actually kind of walks me through what a mock prep would look like. Everything from turning over the big rocks to details of the quote unquote peak week. Luke Miller and I are actually going to be hosting some seminars together, first of which being in the UK. So if you're in the United Kingdom, we are going to be at Ultraflex Gym in Rotherham, which is Kuba's gym. If you guys are familiar with British bodybuilding, you're undoubtedly familiar with Kuba. Ultraflex is probably the best set and setting in the UK for such an event. So Kuba will obviously be there. Luke, myself, the Prescript team, we're going to be doing a 2-day hypertrophy intensive. Learn the proper setup, stabilization, execution, exercise selection, periodization, everything that comes into putting on muscle. So very excited to be able to share the stage with Luke over there in the UK. It will be a very special event on the calendar for the year. So if you're thinking about doing a seminar this year, I would highly suggest come joining us. Still tickets available if you go on www.pre-script.com. Now, if you're looking to learn a little bit more from Luke, he's been generous enough to donate even more of his time. And his submission, his keynotes address for the Prescript Collective will also be going live this Friday. So you'll be able to sit in on some more in-depth and more detailed insights into his methodologies around physique development, improving body composition, burning fat, gaining muscle. All of that is going to be live on this week's keynote address for the Prescript Collective. The Prescript Collective's goal is education for all. Join the conversation. $35 a month, you get access to all the Prescript coaches around the world. We have hundreds of people constantly delving into dialogue around different things, health, fitness, training, soon to be nutrition. Stay tuned for that. And it's a very unique group of coaches. So you have access to the forum, all the coaches on our messaging board, as well as the Emerging Ideas series, which is going to be what Luke's a part of this week. On top of that, we also have our monthly literature reviews, which not only go through how to interpret the science, but how to go ahead and critically think about best practice in research as it comes out. So very valuable collection of services that we put together over at Prescript. So guys, if you're interested in hearing more from Luke or hearing more from strength coaches, performance enhancement, physique development coaches, nutrition, biomechanics experts, you name it, we got it. On a bi-weekly schedule, we're trying to bring you the best and the brightest upcoming in the industry through our Emerging Ideas lecture series. So enough paying the bills for today. So just to recap quickly, Luke Miller at No Switch Fitness on Instagram. If you're going to be in the UK, do join us in Rotherham in March. I want to say it's the last weekend in March. We'll be at Ultraflex. If you want to join us digitally anytime, day or night, Prescript Collective is live on the website, www.pre-script.com. So do feel free to join in on the conversation. A lot of the podcast listeners might not feel as if a full-on 10, 12, 16, 20-week course is for them, but they still want to pick up sort of some ways to optimize their training, their nutrition, their health, things like that. Prescript Collective is for you. And without any further ado, one last thing, Prescript Barbell is currently up for sale. So do head over to the Prescript site, check that out. Enough paying the bills, guys. Do enjoy this episode with myself and Luke Miller, and we'll see you guys next week.
Place to start this would be when Lundy hits the 4, 3, 2, 1 is your first show.
Oh, Lordy.
Because you've seen so many people to their first show, their second show, their third show, their fucking 20th show. But how did it start for you? And like, because I think one of the things that I like about any coach is like obviously the skin in the game and going through the process, because there's an intangible between the lines curriculum that you learn when you go through it that I think gives you an edge next to those that have just read about it. So like, tell me about the process of your first show, like from the inception of like, I want to do a bodybuilding show to stepping on stage.
Yeah. So it kind of starts with my competing career in high school. So I played, you're going to laugh, golf at a really high level. Yeah, I played golf at a really high level. And so a meniscus tear lost my golf scholarships. And so that's actually when I dove full bore into bodybuilding. I was already kind of training at a gym that had a lot of it. In the great big town of Mobile, Alabama. Yeah, I know, right? Redneck to the core. But that was like my senior year of high school. And by freshman year of college, I was on the stage. So I was like 155 pounds, soaking wet, like shredded. Like I was in shape, but like ever since I lost my scholarships, that was like day one. I'm like, there's a reason my brand's called No Off Switch, right? Or No Switch Fitness. It's because like everything I do is like all in, or I just don't give a flying fuck, right?
Now, was bodybuilding like waiting at the gates for you? Like, were you like, when golf is obviously taken too soon, but like when it's over, this is going to be where I send it? Or was it like kind of a thing where, you know, because I know a lot of athletes across the sport where when they're done with their primary sport, like it's a bit of an identity crisis. Because I'm assuming if you're high level in high school, you must have started playing golf at a young age.
Yeah, yeah. I was like 8. I played varsity 7th grade through senior year of high school. So yeah, so I was considered like my best friend who played with me is playing on the PGA Tour right now. So yeah. So like we played at a pretty high level. I would have played like walk on SEC or right below that D1 golf probably.
That is wild.
So identity crisis, big time. But I had already gotten into training and in a gym that bodybuilding was big. So it was more of a shift in a competitive outlet, right? Like I hate like the identity crisis thing because I'm a big believer that what we do isn't our identity. It's just a part of what we are, right? It shouldn't completely define us, but it was a quick shift. So once I had like that month to kind of process what the fuck had happened with like losing my scholarships and stuff, it was like, all right, this is where I'm going to go. I'm going to do this.
So then you said that was senior year, and then by first year college, you were on stage.
Yep. So
now, what was, I guess if you could go back and knowing what you know now then, like that classic quote, what did you do that you look back and you're like, oh man, what an idiot, versus did you like, what was the process of that? Because like I'm always a huge advocate of like lateral thinking. So when I hear I was really good at one thing, it's like, okay, you must have accumulated skills along the way that, albeit not directly transferable, the process of acquiring those skills in and itself is something that's useful to any endeavor, right? So I'm really interested because that's a weird intersection of like age and spontaneity and wisdom all sort of being kind of just floating above you. So like when you look back, what were like some of the stupidest things you did on a prep where you're like, no way would I ever do that again?
Oh man, I out of the gate, one of the biggest things is just like, and it's a good thing and a bad thing, but like just putting the head down and just going after. I'm talking like 3-hour sessions and like those kinds of things that were just like absolutely insane. If I had to go back and correct myself though, it would be honestly not competing so much so fast out of the gate. Like 2 years into bodybuilding, I had done 4 shows. And so like a lot of skin in like the contest prep game and like doing it and being in it and all that kind of stuff. And I did my first 4 shows natural. So I did do a pretty good job of like not jumping into that boat before I felt like I was fully and enveloped in the sport, but jumping into it way too fast as far as like getting into the stage session. Cause like, dude, I was 155 pounds for my first 2 shows and I was a whopping 160 for my second 2. So it's like you just keep doing that back to back. There's not room to improve, right? And just rushing into it, but you love it so much. It's like you do it the first time, you chase it. It's a thrill. Like, people don't understand. Like, when you love the process and you see the process come to fruition, it's like you don't even realize you're on stage. Really? Yeah, like it's such a blinding experience because like the lights are up, right? The stage lighting, so you don't even really see the audience that much, depending on the auditorium, right? So you're on stage, you're just like doing your thing, and all you know is the person who's next to you is bumping elbows, and it's like, okay, right. Like this is game time, right? This is what we do, and honestly, man, the stage, like, it's so quick that it's almost disappointing. Where it's like, oh man, it's over. Like, that's the kind of sensation you get, even like if you do well, like if you win a class or something. It's like, oh man, it's over. Like, because you just want that process again, right? And so it's easy to chase it and chase that rabbit hole. But that's a mistake that I made early. It was just like getting into it way too fast as far as like competing back to back to back. And that's why you see me.
Was there anything you did inadvertently well that you're like, man, I stumbled into that one?
Oh, it's the learning part. Like I've always been a student. Like, my mom was valedictorian from her high school, graduated college 3 years instead of 4, like those kinds of things. So like the student side was ingrained into me a lot. And so with golf being so detail oriented, that just transferred. Like, I literally had my head in a book or a video every single day. And so I learned really fast. And then with the engineering background, like going into college, doing engineering, like biomechanics picked up really quickly. And then my research was in orthotic prosthetic design to start. And then from there, it was helmet impacts. So like mapping out concussions based on helmet impacts within helmet design. So like it just really started to click when I got to college.
Now, transferring this over, like, you know, bodybuilding, I don't want to say it's undoubtedly gained in popularity. I think that's very safe to say that it's not going anywhere. Will it be broadcasted on national TV like the olden days? Maybe not, but at a certain point, what is the difference between views on social media and views on ESPN, right? Like, it's such a powerful medium that one would argue that there's way more eyeballs on bodybuilding now than there ever has been. And with that increased exposure, we see a lot of people looking to, you know, try their hand at bodybuilding. It's something they want to do, right? That I think it's like is it an Aristotle quote or that always goes around about like a sin for a man to not see his physical potential or some bullshit like that. But take me through the process. I'm an aspiring bodybuilder. I've never done a show. I understand that to navigate it successfully, a coach with a good eye and a steady hand is going to be where I go. I call Luke Miller. Where do you start?
To be honest, it's the first question is like, and this is like, shout out to Killian from like a essay type of a question, is like, how long have you been doing this as a lifestyle? Because you'll get some people, first-time competitors, who've been living like a bodybuilder for 15 years, and it's like literally the only difference is they want to put on a thong and slap on some tan, right? And it's kind of like, if you're that point, like if you've been doing everything that entails, then like, where's the real shift, right? But for most people, it's typically around the conversation of like, what do you know about the sport? Are you still natural? Are you not? Like, what does that conversation look like? And oftentimes, and just because of the content I put out around safer use, like I get a lot of inquiries around safer use PEDs within first deployment or for first contest prep. Like, what does that look like? Should I even go down this route? And so like, honestly, man, like because of just the place I've positioned myself, a lot of the conversation goes around that. It's like, learning it, experiencing it. What experience do you have around it? Have you dieted for photo shoots before and just never been on stage? Or do you have no experience dieting at all? And then like that information gathering kind of tells me how I push forward the envelope, right? Like this weekend, like I've got Mitch who's doing a national show, competing for his pro card, has competed multiple times. But also have a guy, Brandon, who this is his first show. And he's going to give Mitch a run for his money in the overall, like that kind of a person. And it's because he's just been a bodybuilder without the stage, right? And so that process from Brandon to Mitch doesn't look too much different because he's been doing it his whole life. But you get the person that's like 140 pounds soaking wet. It's like, let's plan 3 years in advance and actually present something that's worthwhile. So it's very contextually dependent, but that's typically the first conversation is around like managing expectations around what it is that they want to actually do and what experience do they have to actually say that that's what they want to do. There's a lot of people who say it, right? I want to be a pro bodybuilder. I want to be on an Olympian stage, and then they experience it, and it's not for them.
So do you find yourself like working with clients, or do you find that clients that come to you are already pre-vetted with the notion that like, look, this might be a 3 or 4 year thing, that this is a guy that's not going to rush me to stage? Like, you know, and I think it's a mark of like a good coach, like a good personal trainer doesn't have fat clients, at least not fat clients for very long, right? Like, because they're not there to just take someone's money and not see any progress. So like, if you have someone who's come to you, like, do you have anyone on like a longer term schedule of like, look, man, we're going to do this for a few years. And then once you're at a quote unquote respectable size, and for not even like maybe necessarily winning, but the objective outcome of like, look, this is going to take time, and rather than going the aggressive drug deployment route, we're going to use sort of, you know, Mother Nature's PED of just fucking calendars to get you where you want to be in a safer fashion. Do you have many clients like that?
Yeah, I've got a couple. This is kind of off track, but you know what an Enneagram is? It's like the personality.
Oh,
an Enneagram, the personality test. So
no,
it's a way to classify how you communicate with others. And so a lot of coaching is around communication and self-awareness around how you communicate. And so I'm an 8, which is like a very direct communicator, as in like, I don't really sit here and twinkle your toes or blow air up your skirt. Like it's the honest truth. And so like, I have some guys who's literally their plan headings are like Project 2024. Like, and we're in the end of 21, right? Like, so that's the kind of stuff and conversations you have to have with people. It's like, where are you at, and where does being competitive actually look like for you? And that's honestly like, I do have a couple, and it's like, until you can prove to me that you can treat an off season like a prep, do you even deserve to prep? It's like, there's such a large learning curve because, and this is like to bring awareness to the actual prep part for people who haven't done it. From a psychological perspective, prepping is not the greatest, and it leaves a lot of people broken.
In what way?
Saying no to yourself for that long. So like, you have to constantly say no to, and especially as you progress through the prep, it depends on what you handle. Like, I'm one of those people, I could be 10 days out and go sit and watch Emily eat a burger. Like, it's not going to bother me. I don't give a rat's ass. But for first-time competitors, that's the kind of stuff that, from a habit standpoint, that's just been a normal everyday activity that you do every few weekends, right? As they go, they chill with family, those kinds of things. And then you start to say no because you can't be around it because it's your first time and those kinds of things. And like, until you can learn to be around that, like psychologically, that ends up in a really bad spot for a lot of people at the very end. And like, saying no for 18, 20, 22 weeks, it's almost half a year, man. Like, it's saying no to everybody and everything that you've done for the last five months, for the next 6 months. You get to the show and it might be enjoyable, but then the yes man comes out and shit goes south really fast, right? And then you deal with esteem issues and a lot of those kinds of stuff. Because like, when you talk about first-time competitors, right, like one of the biggest things I like to look at is like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? First-time competitors, most of the time, are not in like the self-actualization portion of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They're still looking for belonging, esteem issues, things like that. And so this will be the first time that they've been on an esteem high, especially if they get shredded. And then they have to go back the other way, right? And so like, it leaves a lot of people in a very bad spot. And like, I'll be real, like, so Emily missed her pro card at Universe, the first show, by a single placing. So she missed it by one spot. She left that show with the expectation to do USAs in like 4 weeks. Yeah, 4 weeks. And she got like a week and a half in and just couldn't do it. She had been prepping for 36 weeks because of canceled shows. Yeah. So like, that's the kind of stuff, man. It's like, it just wasn't worth it. And it's the simple things. Like, people don't realize that when you look down at your shoe and it's untied, and you don't want to bend over to tie it. Hopefully they're off-whites, but you don't want to bend down to tie it. then that's the kind of place you're at. It's like you're so tired you don't even want to tie your shoes. And so like preparing someone for that, it's so hard to prepare someone for that until they actually experience it.
Do you find yourself, because like I love the self-awareness conversation on both ends, right? Like that being like a prerequisite to really going through this and being like, look, I don't think you have any idea of how difficult this is, but also like the fact that you've gone and what was the name of the personality test that you were referring to?
It's called an Enneagram. Fuck, have Lindy pull it up. I don't know how to spell it. I'm not a speller.
Okay, an Enneagram, got it. So my question to you is from a coaching perspective, because this is something that I've wrestled with, is knowing your direct nature and knowing, I always think you're gonna get a better product from me if I'm me, right? Like if I'm like the truthful version of me, it's the best version of me. Now the best version of me might not be the best for you. Are you a coach that will try and deviate that? Like, you know, I have borders around what I deem to be effective models of communication for me and my personality type. So like, can you, because I would imagine at a certain point there is, you know, there's a fine line between, I don't know if coddling is the right word, and encouraging, right? And that's got to be tough for someone who is like more direct in nature. And, you know, I think the true art is creating exclusion criteria and knowing some of your clients. I feel like you've done that very well. Of like, there's no wizard behind the curtain. It's like, this is just the guy. This is the guy when you're hungry. This is the guy when you win. This is the guy when, you know, you don't want to do cardio. This is the guy where you hit a PR. Like all of these is the same, that consistency. Do you find yourself ever having to like wrestle with that fine line between like compassion and coddling?
Now, no.
Explain. Like before, yes, then is the default answer that people have, right?
So it just comes down to the quality of the client I coach nowadays, right? Like the content I put out is direct. It's me. It's the reality of it. It's like you go listen to that podcast I put out, or the YouTube content I put out, or even the social media stuff I put up. Like it's not any difference in how I run my coaching, right? And so people come in nowadays with a set standard of expectations, and I have a check-in system and a process that you will follow. There's 1 to 2 variations of that check-in system and process you follow. If you can't do it, then there's the door, right? Like, and that's the kind of stuff that I'm at now. In the past, I would try to be more, is it empathetic or sympathetic?
Yeah. Empathetic. You don't know what it's like to be in this
situation. And so it's like, I would try it and it would never work and it would never end up in a good outcome. Like 3-4 years ago, right? When I was coaching, like not the same type of clientele. I was doing bodybuilders, but not at the same level I do now. It never came out well. And it's just like, the system is built there to make a better individual across the board, whether it be an actual bodybuilder, a better client, a better communicator, because that's like a check-in system should be built around communication systems, right? That's completely what it's about. And if someone can't communicate through a system that's built out and catered towards best results, then they probably don't actually want the best results for themselves. They want a babysitter. They want a fan. They want something like that. And that's fine. If that's what you want, there's people who will do that. And that's just, not to be rude, but that's not like what I'm here to do. I'm here to improve individuals to the best of their capacity and create a system that elevates the standard at which I coach and elevates the standard at which other coaches hold themselves.
Thought exercise, because let's take this real.
Jordan.
Let's say I wanted to hit the stage. Like, you kind of know what I look like. I don't know. I'm like 260 right now. My diet's going to shit. I travel all the time. Like, let's bring it out of the realm of the hypothetical and be like, all right, first off, how many weeks out? Like, because you said 24, you said 22, you said 16, 10, 12. Like, what is, like, you're looking at me going like, we got to take a red marker to this motherfucker. Where do I stand as far as like, you're prepping me for the first show? Let's do it here right now.
There's probably, so just like the system that I run would be 3 to 4 months habit formation based stuff. Cause like you can't just go from 0 to 100 real quick.
Right.
3 to 4 habit formation. And then based on composition, it's going to be 18 to 25 weeks. So you're
So that seems long. Like that seems crazy long. But like, break that down for me as far as cardio, dieting, I don't know. My brain immediately goes to cheat meals. Like, all right, I haven't started yet, but when's my first fucking burger? This is bullshit.
Oh,
but like, because that isn't. I mean, I definitely respect the process, but it's like, enlighten me. Like, I'm me, whatever I am. What is the first like 4 weeks look like?
So this may be where a little bit more of the catering process happens, is in the plan formation, right? It's the initial history and information gathering that allows me to build something you can adhere to. And so like with the travel and things along those lines, like it's obviously going to be a more macro based oriented plan. Expectation is not going to be around meal plans. And then creating that system and schedule that keeps you on track at all times. And so like starting at a low end of training and cardiovascular activity. So probably like your activity to start is just step counts. You can walk around a fucking airport, right? Like that's easy to hit. And then you can start adding in as needed the actual cardiovascular activity once the person adapts to the schedule. And so like for someone like you coming in, it would be completely around schedule management. Like you've got your hand dipped in so many things and you're traveling so much. It's like, how can we create a successful system for you that is within the confines of the check-in system that I have? And that is where the process starts, is like limited exposure, adapt to the exposure, progress the adaptation. It's a concept. Doesn't just apply to training, right? Like we don't just eat burgers and fries twice or three times a week and then jump into prepping. Like that's not how that works. And so we start like with mapping out a consistent step count you can get, mapping out sessions that you can follow on a consistent basis, probably somewhere in the realm of 4 to 5 times a week. And then that can progress from there, make sure the habit formation moves you in the direction of the start of a prep. Whether that's you're too fat right now, we need to diet a little bit, and then, yeah, bingo. Too fat right now, need to diet a little bit and set up like the caloric expenditure to be able to prep for the next 20 weeks from there. Or is it like we just need more tissue, the body comp's not too bad, and we can push up pretty aggressively? It's all going to be around habit formation, and the plan setting is going to be completely around that. And that's like where we start to align things where it needs to go as my rising desk goes up. But that's where we start to align like the person to the goal set, is when we get those like habit formation things there, then we're able to pull the trigger. Because like one of the best quotes you can talk about when you talk about bodybuilding is that the differential between all season and prep shouldn't be an actual change in your day to day. That's where the difference between competing and just doing it for fun is a large difference.
When does the mirror start to play a more active role in the day-to-day decision-making process? Because I've always been, like, we made a joke when you were in Tampa. Killian doesn't know. I mean, he actually does, like, watch a lot of bodybuilding stuff, and I'm sure he's just being facetious. But, like, the ideas of being full versus dry versus all that. Like, when does, and, like, I'm not being facetious at this time, which is rare for me. But it's like, when do we start to make adjustments based more so off of like the visuals? Because like obviously I'm assuming performance will dwindle. Like there has to be a point where the caloric deficit is, and I see it now where, with the guys in Pure where I, been training or overseas, it's undoubtedly going to be something where the performance will drop off. And for me, that's their North Star in strength and conditioning, is that's your metric, right? And there are purposeful points of overreaching where we know performance might be dwindling, but a larger adaptation is going to follow. So when is it that you switch gear to like the mirror?
Honestly, it would depend on like how far out the person is from being ready to start a prep.
Let's reverse engineer now, because this is something that I'm fairly certain this term will make you cringe. But let's say that we're in, wait for it, the peak week. Oh, the peak week, the magical peak week, ladies and gentlemen. The only thing better than a peak week is a finisher, a good finisher. We talked about this earlier. No better finisher in a workout than a people's elbow. But tell me, it's my last week before the show. I'm in last week condition, which obviously is going to be varying. I'm not fat. I'm lean enough that we're still going to do it. Like, and I'm certain that's a stressful time for you. because you need to wake up. And a lot of times in the remote coaching space, it's going to be pictures, check-in photos every morning. I'm assuming every morning at least. What's that last week?
Yeah, so it's probably twice a day photos at that point, because we're building the peak week model, right? So like we're finding what time the show is on Saturday. So let's say it's a 10 a.m. show. Schedule warranting. We're hopefully building a model around what do they wake up looking like? Hopefully we can move training to that time of the day that the show's going to be at to mimic the pump up before stage. We're practicing the peak throughout the week with like carbohydrate loading, fluid manipulation, sodium manipulation, depending on the person. A lot of people don't require the fluid sodium side, and it's just food. And that's kind of the everyday Sunday, Monday through the show is you're sending me fasted pictures. We're setting a plan for the day. You're going about it. You're sending me post-workout pictures. And then at night, you're sending me what time you're going to bed, your actual weight, so that I know the drop-off overnight. So that by the time I have you going to a show on Saturday, I know exactly what time to have you go to bed, what weight goes with the look going to bed to have you wake up where I want you to be on stage.
Okay, so it's not, and that's always, I laugh when I say the term because it usually comes with it a whole bunch of nonsense. like that seems pretty logical. It's like kind of, it's basically sport specific training. It's like, well, let's emulate or replicate all of the variables on game day, and let's just see how you perform day in, day out. And then if it works, we'll just do that. If we're, too sharp or too flat, we'll adjust accordingly. But is it disheartening for you, or is it difficult for you to see the industry myths, folklores, crap around? Like peak week science to me has always been one that really puts bodybuilding under a microscope of like, wait, do you guys have any idea what's going on? Where this is like a totally logical, it's like, yeah. And I love when you said we don't really have to manipulate fluid or sodium too often. It's really just food. What are like some of the most egregious, and it doesn't have to be people, but what are the most egregious offenders of peak week, let's call them rituals that you've come across?
Water crowd is the first one. Basic biology is that the extracellular to intracellular fluid balance probably just as a living human isn't going to change too much, no matter whether you throw in a diuretic or you throw in 3 gallons of water. Like that balance is what keeps us alive. So if you think you're going to pull water, no, like that's not going to happen. Like you better be ready to step on stage come Monday. Literally the only differential in the physique is finding the balance between full and flat that's going to present the best version of that person. Right. And so that's where the comment from like fluid and sodium manipulations not really being overly necessary for a lot of people is if we understand that there's a certain level of food and fluids that individual looks the best at, it's probably the amount they need to be walking on stage with. And so it's just that whole peak week's built around that. There's no pulling water. It's having that person, and this can be like refraining from water for a period of time. So like there's been clients where like you'll test different sleep times, right? So you'll have them sleep longer during the day one day during the week, to see if the longer exposure to less fluids results in a better look when they wake up in the morning. So rather than 8 hours of sleep, you'll knock them out with some Benadryl and you'll have them sleep 11, right? Or 10. And if that look looks better, then we know that the less exposure to fluids alongside the amount of food that they had the day before resulted in a better look. And so we can taper the fluids in order to do that. Now, there are ways to drive diuresis with manipulations in sodium and potassium where you can mimic that process a lot faster because you are driving diuresis through that. Or you could just use the classic diuretic and gamble with that, the fact that you might have the diuretic they said you have and you might not. But for the most part, I prefer predictable scenarios, right? And so the predictable scenario is building out that model where I know how much food and fluids you look your best at, and that's how I'm going to put you on stage. And so the pull water crowd is awful for me.
Okay, now the other one that kind of always comes to mind when I think about pull water is like kind of, I guess the term would be like junk loading.
Man.
Right. So like to me, I don't know what it is because like I'm not a huge burger and fry guy, but if I listen to bodybuilding coaches more, I should be shredded when I wake up, which is like always, I just don't get it. Because it's like some guys like an onion ring. And some guys like, no, you got to get the New York cut fries with the vinegar. And then you got to make sure there's extra pickles because of the salt. I'm just like, certainly none of this matters. But like the night before the show, cheeseburger crowd. It's like, dude, it's fucking everywhere. And I'm trying to think like science my way through it. It's like, is it something to do with neurotransmitters? Is it some ghrelin, leptin shit I don't understand? Or is it just, no, you're shaking your head. So like junk loading, is this a Hail Mary attempt of like YOLO? Okay,
yeah, so it's fixing a problem, right? If they haven't ran the peak week well, most of the time it's resulting in they probably haven't fed their client or given their client enough fluids. And so they're trying to reverse that with a large caloric bomb, but also like a sodium bomb, right? Like what's the differentials between the food that we eat on the day-to-day and something from a fast food restaurant? Sodium's the main contributing factor, right? And so it's like, if you would have managed the peak week throughout the week a little bit better, the necessity of that is probably not there. So that's where it's like predictable versus unpredictable is like, oh, okay. And then like you throw diuretics in with the burger and fries protocol. It's like, we need fluids to load, yet you're cutting fluids and throwing a diuretic and you're trying to fix flat with burger and fries and sodium when we don't have the fluid present in order to do such. It's like, probably not going to result in a very good outcome. And then especially if you have like a 2-day show or a morning night show, there's a rebound effect to diuretics. In case people haven't heard, maintaining a look across the day with diuretics in play, it can be a disaster because there is always a rebound, right? The amount of rebound is referenced to the amount of diuretics that you used for the most part, typically. Water, sodium manipulations accordingly as well. But that's where it's like the Hail Mary. It's like, okay, I fucked up. I need to fix this.
Right. So you drop half a cap of aldactone and just, throw back the double cheeseburger. And it's just like, it's literally the Jesus take the wheel on the final day. The only
great
day
thing
that
is
matters.
like the people that says, oh, it's potassium sparing, you're fine. It's like, do you even understand molecularly how a diuretic works? Like, can we like skip the grade school, like, oh, it's fine type conversation?
Yeah, it's fine. I'm not going to die. My heart's not going to stop. It's fine. Everything's fine. It's literally the dog meme, like sitting in the room with everything burning. That should just be a bunch of burgers and fries and like Lasix and Diazide and all that shit. Because one thing I've always seen, you brought up an interesting point about the underfeeding being like what allows some of those bombs to go off in somewhat of a seemingly well-targeted place. Because I've seen this so many times. Like the miss the mark, and the next day, the guy looks ridiculous. Like the guy goes out and like eats his sorrows away. Like comes in tight. They don't do anything crazy. He gets less than a favorable placing. Was looking real promising during the prep. Just in his darkest hour, reaches for a calorie. And then the next day, it's like, that would have won the fucking show. Why is it that coaches are so afraid to feed their clients, almost like period, but especially leading into a show? Like, why hasn't this caught on yet? With so many pictures arriving on the show recap post, we're like, yo, this guy looks, if you brought that, you'd be center stage first call if they leave you there the whole
I
day.
think it's maybe some like conversation around what happens that actual day too, because you're seeing the pictures first thing in the morning post-show after eating all that where it hasn't hit them yet fully. Like they're getting the fullness from some of the sodium. Like digestion of food takes a hot minute. It's not just overnight. So you'll see those people wake up looking great that morning. If you looked at them that afternoon, they look like a water buffalo, right? And so it's like a lot of people kind of go and they see that happen post-show, and it's like then you have water retention for days after that as we kind of process through the electrolyte fluctuations that have happened throughout the peak week, which most of the time that has happened when that situation occurs is like they missed the mark. There was probably drastic fluid and electrolyte balance issues that allowed them to have the miss the mark look on stage. And this happens so much because people don't understand like building a peak week model, like building a model that's predictable, right? They're going for the 10% jump or the 2% jump that could result in a 10% loss. If we build a model that allows for the reaction of each person throughout the prep based on previous data, we can land that person as close to their ideal look as possible without having to do a lot of that stuff. And so like a lot of it is built around like the Hail Mary approach, and they see that first thing in the morning, like, oh, I'm going to burger and fry load for the next show. And then they burger and fry load for the next show because they woke up looking so good the morning after. And they miss the mark again because, again, it's a large sodium influx, it's a large electrolyte balance issue. And again, we're missing the mark because there's so many variables, right? Anything predictable is more likely to be a winner.
All right, so like I love the idea of predictability, right? Like collecting your data and just making data-driven decisions. Now, with, I think for me, I look at it from an outsider and just be like, stress has to be such a factor, right? And stress can be psychological, stress can be physiological. So on the day, like different people's appetite or tolerance or ability to handle whatever you want to call it to stress, are there anything that you can do from, like, let's say a morning to a night show where, like, what does a nutrition approach look like during the day of a show? And like, what are some cases where if this, then that? And like, not necessarily Hail Mary is the sense that you're not really sure of the outcome, but this look appears, we can do X, Y, and Z to help mitigate or offset, this, and really bring in that last couple %. What does the day of the show look like from a coaching perspective?
Yeah, so there's a couple things we can do from like a stress management standpoint. To start, it's going to be proper planning. So like picking warm-up shows. There's a lot of utility in doing shows to practice that before it really counts. So like, for example, like with Mitch, like he doesn't even need the qualification for nationals, but we're still doing the show this weekend to get the nerves out, go through a backstage process, kind of get that kind of stuff managed beforehand before it really matters for a pro card, right? When it comes to like show day nutrition, and we build that predictable model, this is where the sacrifice between morning and night show has to happen. So typically for most people, you're either going to land in like somewhere along the realms of like a little bit flat, but like on the drier side. So typically we see a little bit fuller being a little bit air quote watery or fuller, like the more full muscle belly type look. And so you have to decide what you want to bring to the morning show, and that kind of lands you where you try to go for the night show. Because like in like a case by case example, for the person who looks a little bit better on the flatter side, they're drier, you have more lines, they have plenty of muscle where it's not a problem. We can land them in at the prejudging slightly on that flatter side, but then continue to feed them and hydrate them where they're a bit fuller for the night show. So the process doesn't change a whole lot. Like it's just going through a normal day again. Where for the person that blasting full is where they are the best, you have to land them at that stage blasting full, let them ride it out a bit throughout the day. So typically a nap, minimal food, get them to the point where you can feed them and hydrate them quite a bit again, and then land it again for the night show. And so it's more predictable if you have a night show, morning show where you can land them a little bit flatter in the physique that looks like that, or with what they're doing nowadays, back-to-back judging. So a lot of shows are doing roundabout prejudging night shows. So like the one this weekend will be prejudging, walk off stage, have finals.
Whoa.
All back-to-back. So then you're talking about landing a plane once, not twice, right? But you have to land that plane where they're able to hold that look for however long they have to be on stage. With a back-to-back prejudging finals, they're on stage / backstage for 45-ish, 50 minutes if they're in the overall. So you're coming into it quite a bit fuller to start so that by the time they pump up, they're posing, they're not losing that look a whole lot as they start to flatten out with all the posing. Because you know how like with a powerlifting meet, you feel like you got hit by a dump truck because you just did max effort? It's fairly similar with bodybuilding. Probably not to the quite same extent, but you pose for multiple rounds each time you're on stage, especially if you're going for overall. You wake up the next morning sore as shit.
Interesting. I never once considered that.
And so it's not to the same like central nervous system like blow, but it's still there. So you have to account for that. Like you've heard the terminology like they get better as they pose.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just them like driving fluid and nutrients because they were probably a little bit too full. And so it's starting to kind of dissipate as they pose. And so that's where like the way that you bring someone into a show depends on how the show's ran too. Then you have 2-day shows. That's a clusterfuck where it's like morning show is Friday, 9 a.m. Night show is 9 a.m. Saturday. And so then again, it's like you have to rinse and repeat the process. This is where a lot of heavy diuretic usage happens.
What, is that just because it's like fluid retention differences like with sleep? Like does sleep really throw the wrench in that?
Sleep is typically like a good way to like get it off. It's like,
okay,
let them kind of like flush it out, stay off their feet type of a situation. So across 2-day shows, a lot of times you'll see like they'll land a peak and then they'll keep feeding and to the point that they're really full again. And so the diuretic usage will come back in that night before going into the next day. I don't even think that that's necessary if you manage it right. But that's where a lot of diuretic overusage happens, like with all the issues that bodybuilding has nowadays, because everybody's dying apparently. You'll see the diuretic usage into the morning show and then also into the night show. So you have however long they're doing it into the first prejudging on Friday. So diuretic usage, I've seen people send 10-day diuretic usage protocols out, which is absolutely asinine. It's from people who we don't associate in the industry with. But think about that, like 10 days into the first show of diuretic usage and then you have to go another day. Like that's, you wonder why people have problems.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to normalize. Like your body attempting to process that while still establishing a look must be almost near impossible.
Yeah,
because it's almost like you'd end up just chasing it, right? Because you're chasing the side effects of the uptick of that feedback loop.
Yeah,
because you're like, oh no, my vasopressin and my antidiuretic hormone are acting up. I know. Diuretics is like, oh fuck, this is gonna be a nightmare.
It's like you said, it's a cycle, right? Once you introduce, it's a cycle that you're going to be getting into, right? So kind of where a lot of the heavy diuretic usage happens is these longer shows. But it's the same thing, like build a model, land them to where they're the best they can be, and then try to repeat it. Like you can bring people back down. So like with building the model, you'll have like certain amounts of food that associate with a set fluid sodium amount that either bring them up, bring them down, or hold the look, and then you can feed them accordingly. So it's just... Yeah.
Now let's talk about just to kind of bring it full circle, like the days and weeks after a show, right? Like obviously, and this has to be hard. And I mad respect, like I remember Lunsford won this year, and in some sort of, I don't want to say pitiable, but like motherfucker was doing cardio the next morning, which like shout out this guy, but also stop making me feel like such an asshole. Cause I went to IHOP the next morning to celebrate on Lunsford's behalf. I was like, Derek, I'm going to go full stack of pancakes for you. I'm going to pour some maple syrup out for the homie. And he's like crushing steps. It's like, dude, what is what is your take on, okay, the show is over, understanding like the full psychological, physical, sociological, psychosocial ramifications or impact that the show can have? Is there a window of time? Do you try and, is there ever like a, look, you get a hall pass tonight, your body's probably going to punish the fuck out of you for like going too far off the rails. Go have fun with the old lady. And we'll talk tomorrow about, or is it even this planned going into the show?
It depends. So typically, like I prefer having a plan ready for the person just so that they have something. Most people, it's at minimum a free meal like the night after the show. Go enjoy time with family. You spent 24 weeks not doing shit with them, so you need to go enjoy that time. Even further, like into the next day, it'll be like, have another 1 or 2 meals that are off plan, but don't go like eating all day. So like you'll see like the day after a show for some people will be like 2 meals total. It'll be like fucking whatever they want. And then back to Monday, like if it's a Saturday show, they're kind of back on the rails. Then you have people who are more like me, who it's like enjoy the night and then wake up the next morning and I'm starting the plan to move in the next direction.
Interesting.
It's all psychological proclivity, right? Like that's my preference. I would rather do that. And so like I wake up the next morning after a show, I go do my cardio session, I start my meals and the meal plan that I have set out already, And I literally buy groceries according to not only what I need for the show, but for the meal plan that I need after the show. And just because of the content I put out, I attract a lot of that client. So for most of them, it's a plan's mapped out ahead of time. We're kind of getting back on track the day after, but it's not a mandatory, man. Like I do have some that like do enjoy the day after, and then the Monday we're back to moving again. And
I think I'd be a week. I'd be a week if I saw Luke Miller show up on this screen. I'm like, hey, fuck you, bro. Well, yeah, I don't know. My phone wasn't working. Like that's an excuse in 2021. Yeah, my phone hasn't been working. Sorry, bro.
I tell people with peak week, like you're gonna be sick of me by the end of it because you're gonna be hearing me so much. Like you're gonna be contacting me like every 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours. You're gonna be talking to me from Friday on, like if it's a Saturday show, right? And so like starting like Friday, like I'm feeding them by meal. Like it's just update 2 hours from now. I'll build a meal there. We'll feed you again.
And is this how you prefer to be? Like, do you coach yourself?
No. So I let John do that.
Right.
I coach way too many people to have to think of it to that level for myself.
Right.
I do my own training though. So like all of my training and prehab stuff, I do my own. But the nutrition side, I just send me a plan, I'll eat it. I don't really care.
And is that do you like to get coached the way you like to coach? Like I'm assuming in having conversations with John and knowing, you know, his background around nutrition especially, but obviously mixed with his experience, like he doesn't strike me as a guy that minces words.
No.
So like I would imagine you guys get along quite well in the sense that you coach the way you like to be coached, which is like very direct, very you know, not sugar coated, no pun intended.
Yeah, and honestly, man, a lot of that's just being rubbed off from John. Like, dude, I talk to the dude every fucking week, and at this point, with all that we do together every fucking day since 2017, like, he's gonna rub off on me a little bit, and so yeah, so it's definitely a preference there. Like, and honestly, man, there's an intellect level that I need, right?
Right.
Like,
because you can ask John why, and he'll tell you.
Yeah, or I can have a debate with them. We do this shit all the time. Like, throw scenarios at each other and either play devil's advocate or explain why we do that kind of shit. Like, that's the kind of intellectual challenge I need. Because at this point, like, I'm not going to bash anybody, but the level of content that we're putting out through J3U is hard pressed to really have a conversation with someone that's understanding it to that level. There's definitely people out there that are doing it at the level that we expect. And that's the whole point of it, is like, so that when you get that client that is post show, you know how to manage it because you've debated this shit with people who have done this over and over and over and over. And eventually we have a whole slew of coaches in the industry that are coaching to the same level as we are, because that should be the expectation. Like, if you don't come into an industry with the expectation of leaving it better than you found it, like, there's the door. Like, I don't want.
Right. Yeah. Why show up at all? No, I love it, man. I think that's a good place to close off, dude. I always learn, like, tangible and intangible. Talking to you about bodybuilding is always a blast for me. So I selfishly enjoy this just for my own, I don't know, my own self-interest and my own confirmation that I don't think I have whatever it is that you and John and everyone else have. There's no fucking way I could be on. The thought of doing cardio right now makes my heart stop. So let alone doing it day in, day out, or the day after prepping for 22 weeks. It's crazy, man. But I appreciate you taking the time always, brother. I'm really looking forward to sharing the stage with you in the UK. So Luke and I will be doing a hypertrophy intensive at the Ultraflex in Rotherham. I'll make sure to put all the business stuff in the intro as well, so you guys will hear this on the front end. But that'll be a really special event. We did a similar kind of impromptu, no switch pre-script hypertrophy warm up in MI40. It would have been middle of this year, and it was a hell of a lot of fun. So much fun. We thought we would do it again. So I'm really looking forward to catching up again. And guys, just quickly, the thing at the end of the podcast, and I'll front load it, but like, where does everyone find you? How do they contact you around the coaching side? Around the education side, I know you have an evergreen module with J3U that's always up. That's super valuable for coaches who are looking to upskill or begin to start to upskill their process to be one of these coaches that move the industry forward, go with the rap sheet?
Yeah, so No Switch Fitness is pretty easy across all platforms. We have YouTube page, Instagram. You can find the coaches that I have that work under me as well, kind of via YouTube and stuff. That's our main two platforms right now, is Instagram and YouTube. We also have a podcast, No Switch Fitness Podcast. Same thing, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, wherever. Those are the main ones. And then as far as like education content and reaching out for coaching inquiries in the bio, like the average Instagram influencer type person. But there's also links within all the YouTube pages and stuff that you can like book a consult. And then as far as like the education, my applied hypertrophy module that John and I built is always an open thing. It's kind of like your first step into J3U, where we take you into the gym and dissect every single body part and what the expectations of optimal and ideal setups for output and hypertrophy would be and what that would look like as a precursor to entering J3U, which is 6 months of self-paced education. So the whole goal is no off switch in the pursuit of results, and that's going to be with my own personal process, my client's process, and honestly elevating the industry. Like I still remember, on a funny story, or not funny, but like the first podcast of yours I listened to, I had just gotten into grad school. I was walking around fucking Gainesville, Florida. I was at UF, and every day I would look for your podcast on there. And it's like, you had talked about like a meta impact and like creating that meta impact within the industry. And I was like, that is what someone who's in coaching the education space should be looking to do. And so like, while I personally compete and it's great and I love it and I'll see how far I take it, that is like what I live for at this point, is coaching and educating and leaving an impact on the industry that honestly, like, you're dealing with people's hells and lives here. And there's too much in the bodybuilding space that's not having conversations around actually having a full understanding with what we're doing. And so that's kind of where the No Switch Fitness Instagram and the YouTube and the J3U education content's all built around. And even the seminars, it's like, let's take a critical thinking approach and have like more of like a medical mind to it and a do no harm. So that's kind of everything about me, man. That's what we're about. And you can find us any of those platforms.
Dude, such a fan. It's so crazy to see like how far. I remember doing a podcast with you in a Panera. I was in a Panera Bread in some dusty. I was on my way to Joe DeFranco's, and I was in a Panera Bread because it had Wi-Fi, and just to see how far you personally, like, how much fucking size you put on is, in the sense, I mean, I've been following you now for a handful of years, and your own personal development, which is like, to me, and personal development far and above outside of just physique development, which, two things in bodybuilding are different. And I think you're a guiding light as to shining, or a guiding light that shines on those two differences of personal and physique development, and really bringing them together. And ultimately, if you can increase one, you can increase the other. But it's crazy to see kind of what you've done so far, man. And I'm a huge fan of everything you guys put out. I think the meta impact, you guys are there. So I'm just along for the ride, man. And anyone listening, definitely check out the hypertrophy module at J3U if you're interested in coaching. There's no one I could recommend more. So shout out, Luke. I appreciate you taking the time, man. And I'm sure I'll be talking to you probably tomorrow about what we got going on in the UK. So thanks again so much, man. And I look forward to catching up in person.
Of course.
Cool, man.